How you doing, Josh? Welcome to In the Lab SA. We are audio engineering, music production, audio fanatics, sound nerds, so to speak, kind of platform. And I'm so glad to have you here, man.
I'm thrilled to be here. You're based in South Africa, right?
South Africa, Johannesburg.
How incredible. I've never been, but I've always wanted to visit. I've been to West Africa on a story we recorded about voodoo rituals and stuff, but that was in Togo and Benin, but I've never made my way south yet.
I saw that when I was doing my homework on you. I saw that you visited our continent before.
It's an incredible place. Wow.
So where does the story start, Josh? I mean, everyone who ends up in audio has, an interesting story about where they bumped into it, their love for it from a very young age and all of that. So what's yours?
I guess my story started with my dad. He is a conductor and a composer. He conducted for Johnny Mathis's orchestra, in the late 70s. And he also conducted for Michel Legrand, a French composer of film, and worked with him in Paris. So I was always around music growing up. My dad wrote musicals, musical theater. And I guess just being around music all the time, I caught the bug early on about just like hearing melody and hearing all that stuff in my head. And I started writing my own tunes in high school, maybe when I was around 15 years old. Well, earlier than that, I started piecing together a drum set with old shoe boxes and pots and pans from the kitchen. And I made myself a drum set probably at around age 11. And my folks decided to get me a Remo Junior Pro drum set, which was just, a kick, a tom, and a cymbal. I think that's all it was. And I learned how to play, Michael Jackson's Beat It. At 11 years old, loved it. And then when I was 11 years old, we actually moved from Los Angeles, California, where I was born, to Rye, New Hampshire, which is a tiny little town in New England, about an hour north of Boston, Massachusetts. And since the drum set did not make it on the moving truck for some reason, I wonder if that was coincidental, I ended up picking up the guitar. I got a little electric guitar, which I was okay with, just as sort of like a birthday present. But then once I got an acoustic guitar at around age maybe 14, that's when I really started writing my own songs, my own melodies, and just fell in love with that process. Ended up getting some studio time in high school as a birthday gift. And when I was in the recording studio, I thought, oh my gosh, this is incredible. You can do a whole career based on, doing the tech side of things. It just blew my mind that was even a possibility. Basically, my parents started a theater company in New Hampshire. I would perform in rock and roll musicals. I played Tommy and Tommy. I played Claude in Hair. I played Riff Raff and Rocky Horror Show all throughout my high school years. And then when I graduated to college, I didn't want to study theater exclusively. I thought, why not combine two things that I love? So I found a school, Ithaca College, where I studied communications and broadcasting and radio production and television production, where I could learn about, recording, audio, and sort of get a degree in communications instead of theater, thinking, and I minored in theater, thinking, I could always be a performer. You don't need a degree to be a performer necessarily. But I thought, why not, since I'm going into debt for university and college, why not learn something that I could actually apply towards a career? And that was audio production. So at college, at University of Ithaca College, I took every course that I possibly could having to do with audio production, whether it was in the theater school. I took a course about sound reinforcement and wireless microphones and how all of that works for live sound. And in the communication school, I took the, radio courses and the multi-track audio, courses and audio documentary courses. And in the science school, I took a course about the physics of sound. And in the music school, I took a course about electroacoustic music and MIDI and 5-pin DIN and learned about like all of the electronic stuff. And this was way back in 1999. So a lot of this stuff was at its infancy. I learned how to use Pro Tools, and I even for a television show that I worked on, it was like a kids TV show. called Moosh News Corner with puppets. I ran sound, and one of my projects in school was actually getting Pro Tools to sync with the old Betacam tapes. And I actually got Pro Tools to lock with the tape. So whenever you moved your cursor in your Pro Tools session where our audio lived for the episode, the tape would shuttle to that position, if you can possibly imagine that. Yeah, and I thought that was... It was hard, but it was like machine control. It's the same way it does it now, where you can sync, you can import a video into Pro Tools, which I often do for these home concerts, less so for the regular concerts, just so that I can watch it as I'm sort of putting it together to make sure that my audio is matching what's happening on the picture. Yeah. Oh, so anyway, long story short, after university, I got my first real job was at the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C., running the soundboard, putting on some, effects on ghosts. But other than that, there was a lot of playback of sound cues, lots of sort of many layers of musical cues and battle sequences for Shakespearean plays that were all run on 3 mini disc machines that I had to coordinate with an analog console. And this was before, I think the software is called QLab or Show Control, where, all the stuff is in the computer. You just hit play and it'll send whatever music cues you want to all of your surround sound speakers, all over your theater. All of that had to be bussed and managed manually on an analog console when I first started, which I feel very fortunate that I got that experience of the analog world. I think it really did help me prepare for an experience and just add to my abilities, because I learned kind of like the super old school way of doing things. And then the computer came along and made everything 10 times easier.
Yeah. What are some of the lessons that you've carried from that time where analog was king, everything had to be done manually? What are some of the lessons that you still continue with today?
I guess maybe just like how to use a processing chain. So in the olden days, we usually have to take physical patch cords and go out of your channel. Signal flow, I guess, is a big part of it. So, right. So coming out of your track and you're into your processing chain, going through the, what was it? Like, a cinema EQ where you've got your high pass and your low pass and your notch filters, then going through a parametric EQ. This is all analog gear. And like, learning how to deal with like all the different frequencies with the parametric EQ. And then the last in the processing chain would be like the DBX 160 classic compressor, and just learning how to, okay, I'm going to roll off some stuff. I'm going to notch out some hum. That's my first line of defense. Then I'm going to add a shape so that I can make that vocal or track more intelligible, and I can use the graphic EQ for that. And then I'm going to compress it a bit to sort of bring the levels to a consistent place. And then I'm going to route that audio back into the channel of my console. So I learned a lot about sort of the basics of EQ, compression, using analog gear without having to like look at a list of plugins in a menu that's this long and just being intimidated. Like, how does this work? It looks so fancy. All of the graphical user interfaces there's so many parameters. And I think just breaking it down to a much more minimalistic, here's some analog classic gear. Let's just start from the fundamental basics. That's really where I learned my ear training, what sounds muddy, what sounds bright, and how to, what sounds too quiet, and how to make things just in the pocket, so to speak, so that everything that you're affecting, you're bringing out its best characteristics rather than just sort of twisting knobs because there's a preset for it.
True. Before we move on, that's a really cool flamingo you've got going on there. Is that like part of the studio vibe?
Yeah, totally. This is my emotional support flamingo, a gift from my girlfriend. So I like to have it, nearby. It's just kind of hanging out here.
Yeah.
I just think it's kind of funny. Add some character to the home setup.
I think the best place to go from here is straight into the processing. I wanted to say that for a bit later, but we already got into it with you kind of breaking down your process. And I mean, for the over 500 shows you've done for Tiny Desk, Can you take us through a little bit of where you would start with the audio and then how you would approach it?
Absolutely. Most of the time I'll get a hint of instrumentation. That's where really everything begins, right? So I work with the producers. There's a number of producers that work at NPR Music. Each of them have their sort of specialty. So Bobby will bring on a lot of R&B folk. Abby will bring in a lot of hip hop folk. Tom will bring in a lot of classical musicians, and I'll work with the producers, and either they'll connect me directly with managers or, band members themselves to tell me what instrumentation do they imagine bringing to the tiny desk. And of course, oftentimes things need to be scaled back a little bit simply because of size constraints, because behind the tiny desk, there's just not a lot of space. And of course, I'm constantly battling with audio bleeding into everything else. So I take as many direct outputs as I possibly can to help supplement sort of the acoustic mics that I have up in the session. So I'll work with the manager or the band members. Okay, here's the instrumentation they want. So for like Snow Allegra, we want to have a full string quartet. We've got an incredible drummer, and we've got an amazing bass player, and we've got a keyboard player that has 2 keyboards that he wants to play, plus 2 backup singers and Snow. So that's a lot of stuff to fit behind that desk. Absolutely. And a lot of inputs. So I tried to do everything with just, one 8-channel field recorder, because I kind of go old school in terms of how we capture everything as journalists at NPR. We don't use an audio interface going directly into Pro Tools. We actually take gear out into the world. And that's kind of like the conceit of it all. It's like we're actually capturing something in a moment in a place where you don't normally have a recording studio set up. So you have to bring the recording studio or the field recorder to the place. And what I do is use like a film sound field recorder, an ENG recorder made by Sound Devices, a company in Wisconsin. It's an 8-channel recorder. It's an older model called the 788T. It's fantastic. Preamp sounds amazing. Costs $6,000 for 8 channels US back in the day. Very expensive, but it sounds it. And the cool thing about the field recorder is it records to 8 channels of compact flash and SSD internal simultaneously. So if one of your files becomes corrupt, it's all built in. And then I take a stereo out as well and record that separately, just so I have my 2 mix, and then there's an audio interface, not an interface, sorry, it's a controller for the 8 channels, just like an 8-channel analog fader, so that I can do a rough mix in the room, get that off to the video editors quickly so they don't have to rely on my Pro Tools mix at the end. So basically these 8-channel machines, I have 2 of them that belong to NPR Music that I can link together via word clock. And then I have my own third machine so that I could do up to 24 channels at the tiny desk. So, for that Snow Allegra, we had, 4 mics on the 4 strings. I think I had an earthwork on the cello, and maybe some Sheps on the violins. I can't remember. And of course, that main stereo MS mic on Snow, and that's a stereo 2-channel mic, but it's got a directional and a bidirectional mic in it that needs to be decoded in post-production for MS. Yeah. So it's slightly more complicated than your usual thing. And also we have the mics further away from the performers so that it's a much more natural sound. You don't get that proximity effects, that plosive sound that a lot of singers get. It sounds really big and fat, but it's not how people sound in real life. So I like having the mic a little further back for a couple of reasons. I think it's more natural sounding. It gets more of the air. I need to do a lot more work in post-production, riding the levels, because it's very dynamic, but I really love the way it sounds a little further back with the shotgun mic. It's so crisp and bright and brings out that just like really natural, frequencies of speech. Really, it's because the shotgun mics are designed for speech. And then what's also really a nice thing is that it can be a little bit lower out of the shot so that you never see a microphone obstructing the face of the performer, which is a really rare thing to see anywhere, whether it's, a live performance or in a recording studio. You always see a humongous microphone in front of the faces, including on all these home concerts. The artists are holding a handheld or their mic's right up here, where I like having a mic that's designed to pick up a little bit further away. It's more work in post-production to ride those levels to make it sound natural. But I think it's it's what distinguishes us from everything else that's out there.
From everyone else.
Yeah, so I know there's a long way around to answer your question of, how do we prepare? But basically, you get the instrumentation list from the performers. You kind of figure out how to adapt it to the tiny desk. I'm not going to set up 10 mics for my drum kit. I'm going to set up 3, one above, one from the side, and a kick or something like that. And then that'll be enough to sort of capture that sound. And maybe I'll mic it a little bit further back so that it's a little more honest and it's a little bit more of the way someone would hear it, as if, the technology didn't exist at all. Like, what would it sound like if a band got together and played in the corner of a room? Now try to enhance that with all of the technology and techniques that we know as audio engineers, but still preserve that live sound. And it's a really delicate balance between that multi-track world and just like being in the corner of a rehearsal studio with no mic set up at all.
In audio school, all these techniques, your MS and all your stereo miking techniques, in theory, they sound like, when am I ever going to use this? But like now, when you're here actually like breaking it down, I'm like, oh, okay, that's making a whole lot of sense. And, and you're actually breaking down why you do some of the stuff that you do, which is actually quite interesting, man. Because from on the other side, this was like, there's like probably like 3 or 4 mics there backing and yeah, you know what I mean? So now when you're actually breaking it down, it's like really informative, man. Yeah. From my prepared list of questions, I've only asked you 2, but you've answered all of them. So
no way.
Now, I promise. Because on my cue sheet here, I've got the origins, which you've spoken about, the travels to Africa, which you've spoken about, and then advice for technical directors, which I think you've answered that, right?
Advice for technical directors, meaning like audio engineers who are setting this all up. Yeah, sure. I can touch on that a bit too.
Let's
I think that. Sure. Yeah, of course. Obviously the technical part, it's a bit scientific and dry and just like, okay, here's some mic techniques. Yeah. MS stereo. And then maybe for audience mics, I've got some spaced omnis. And then behind the piano, I've got maybe either ORTF or ORTF like this or XY, there's all those stereo techniques that I learned with field sound gathering. Like when I went to Africa to do the documentary sound, I'm using all these different stereo techniques, and then I'm now applying them to capturing live music, which is slightly different than maybe the traditional way of thinking of things due to my journalism background. But when it comes to actually, advice for technical producers, a lot of it has to do with interpersonal relationships and sort of getting what you need and what you want, and being authoritative enough for the artists to trust what you're talking about and to speak to them in a way that they understand you, and you can explain it to them why you're doing something, or you're not giving them in your monitors, or like how are they going to hear themselves, and just the way you can kind of joke around and say, oh, well, like I've had a background vocalist, like how are we possibly going to hear ourselves over this full band? And I'll say, everyone's going to be listening to each other. They're going to be playing more dynamically. Your drummer's really going to be listening to you and playing quieter during the quiet parts and playing louder during the louder parts. And your voice is connected to your mouth, and your mouth is really close to your ears, and you're going to be able to hear yourself even without headphones. It's just like, it's amazing. You're going to hear yourself because of the natural ability of the human body is incredible. And just trust. It's interesting that some of these musicians have never played without a wedge monitor or in-ear monitors, or the ability to tell their monitor engineer, hey, can you turn up the guitar part? They instead have to work together to find that balance acoustically in the room. And some of them have never even tried it before. So it's a huge leap of faith, and they just sort of like, oh, wow. they get very excited. Oh my gosh, like we could actually do this. Like Superorganism. I remember the lead singer of Superorganism was so freaked out that she wasn't going to have her voice blaring through a PA. She's like, I am so quiet. There's no way anybody's going to hear us. And I did set up a little speaker. So I do make exceptions and all.
Yeah.
I do have some speakers set up around the desk where I can certainly pipe in just the vocal, like the mid of the mid-side mic. I'll just send to the speakers above, just so that it gives it just a little bit more, so that the rest of the band can hear her and then she can hear herself, but just barely. And then I think once they started and they just did it and they just adjusted so that they could hear each other, it all just clicked magically. Like, oh, wow. Well, before any of this technology existed, people played music for hundreds, thousands of years, long before in-ear monitors were invented. And it's just like, yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, wow. It's all just music. It's just all just us getting together in a room, jamming when it comes down to it, no matter how famous you are. So that's a really interesting thing to, as a technical director, figure out how to get the trust and earn the trust of your performers so that everything's going to be okay, and to just talk to them about, okay, don't worry about, how it sounds necessarily in the room. I'm taking the bass direct out of the amp. I'm taking a submix of the two stereo keyboards going through the keyboard amp that you can hear in the room, but we're getting the balance between those two keyboards. I'm submixing, I'm getting everything in stereo. So even though I might be sending, like DJ Premier through a mono speaker, like a KRK that I have next to him, and it's blaring, I'm actually taking a stereo out and I'm capturing a stereo out of his turntable setup. And even though you're not really hearing his SM58 chat mic in the room that loud, I'm capturing it all direct. And we're hearing it all in the room acoustically. It's just different. You're not hearing it reinforced. And that's why the wedge monitor is out of the picture. That's why the PA is usually out of the picture, so that we can have just a much more intimate, natural vibe. And that really does come across in the recordings, but in the recordings I get to cheat because I'm taking everything direct, and I can enhance the heck out of that. Yeah. I can find the EQ of that bass to really make that resonate. And I could really, put a stereoizer, like Thundercats performance, like, oh, how does the bass, how does that bass sound like that? How does that? And it's because I put a stereo effect on his bass line, which I don't think I've heard anywhere on any other recording of his. And the result, because he has those incredible effects on his bass, by adding that, by making his mono signal and turning it into stereo, it turns into this like all enveloping vibe, which is, I think, is perfect for that, because he's the main point of focus. It's not just his vocal and his songwriting and all of that and his incredible musicians that he's playing with. But like, for example, his keyboard player, we had set everything up. They rolled in bleary-eyed right after a gig. They had to go to their next gig. They had an hour and then they had to get the hell out and drive to the next city. We didn't have a lot of time. And there was a miscommunication between the producer and myself that they wanted the piano, the acoustic piano, as well as the keyboard set up. And all I had set up for, and it took me hours the day before to set everything up so that they can just come in and roll. All I had set up was the, what is it? The QC88. I forget what is the name of that keyboard? I can't remember. The Yamaha stereo keyboard that we always have on set in the office. And, and he rolled in, he's like, no, I need the acoustic piano too. This Thundercats piano player, he's an incredible musician. I've forgotten his name. Daryl, incredible. And, I was like, look, there's no time. We need to get sound checked and get going. And then you need to you're going to miss your gig. There's no time to like pull up all the cabling, roll in the acoustic piano, figure out where to put it. There's 4 of you. It's all set up. It's perfect. And they was like, okay, I guess. He was bummed out, but he quickly figured out how to reprogram the Yamaha keyboard so that you would have the thick bass notes to match Thundercats bass lines and an acoustic piano split on the same on the same keyboard, flipping through. It was pretty incredible. The guy was unbelievably talented. And then you had the violinist with his little wispy violin parts, and of course the drummer's unfucking believable drummer who's like playing tiki 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 really 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 quiet. That was the quietest concert. Like they really, I don't know, it was like early in the morning. They're like, oh, we have to play this thing totally quiet. So we hear Steven, his vocals acoustically, and they played it so quiet. But if you listen to the recording, I just enhanced the heck out of it. So it sounds really way bigger than it did in the room. And, but they just went with that super quiet vibe, and it was really awkward. He's like, do I just go to the next song? He was asking me in the video, do I just keep going? And I'm like, yeah, go for it. And I remember when they walked in, I walked into the I was so excited they were there. I just loved his album. And I walked into the green room. I was like, man, we are so psyched you're here. And he was just like, okay. He was just so spent. He'd probably been, partying a little bit too hard the night before. And it was just like, noon, which is pretty early for a musician. And he was just like, his voice was hurting. You could tell he's straining a little bit in the concert. But I think that's all. I love that aspect of it being imperfect. So I love that the keyboard player had to figure out how to reprogram the keyboard. I love that he wasn't really into it at first. He was like, why are we here? My voice is hurting. What is this? And then after that first song is done, they get through it. There's the applause. All of a sudden, once they hear the applause for the first time, it's almost like they remember, like, oh, wait a minute. We're doing this. This is a concert. This is real. These people are here to enjoy what we're playing. It's not about the ticket price that they paid, because they paid nothing. It's just, they don't even know their music half the time, because it's just a bunch of people who happen to be at NPR who are available to leave their desk and come watch the concert. These are not usually fans of Thundercat. They're just like, oh, there's a concert upstairs. I guess I'll just take 10 minutes and go check it out. So I think it's just like, oh, wait a minute, this is a whole new thing. And there's something about that magic sort of unpredictability of it. It's just so uncontrived. It's literally me as a journalist, like I'm going to West Africa to record a story about voodoo rituals. Yeah. I feel like I'm also a journalist just going to this corner of the office where a band is set up, and I'm just capturing a moment in time rather than, oh, let's retrack that bass part. Let's get everything perfect. Let's redo it. Like all of the parts that make it imperfect are part of the magic.
Wow. And I mean, for a platform like NPR Music to be on like billions and billions of streams, that clearly comes across, in the visuals and the sound and the whole product once the people, really consume it. Because I realized that your platform is really impactful. When I put out like the tweets and stuff like, yo, speaking to Josh tonight, and I was like, wow, oh my word, please ask him this, please ask him that, please ask him that. So I think now we can just get into some of the questions that the people had for you, and
sure,
and what they want to know from you. So first one, what separates a good engineer from an excellent one? This one's from Tom.
Probably just making an artist feel comfortable. Like a lot of the parts that you can't learn in school is, I'm very fortunate that I work in a place where people really respect what we've done at Tiny Desk. I haven't been there since the beginning. I started in 2015. So, there's probably 400 shows I didn't record, Wow. And my predecessor, Kevin Waite, was just an incredible mentor at teaching me how to work with musicians, being a happy, smiling, calm presence. Because a lot of these musicians, for some of them, this will be the biggest video that they have all year in terms of views. This might be the moment that they have to sort of introduce their music to an audience that never would have heard it otherwise. So they could be very, very nervous. So I think a big part of it is making sure that you have the ability to make them feel super comfortable and calm and sort of have a good time and joke around a little bit but also be firm in what you need. And for example, Alicia Keys, when she came they were wanting to, her folks that came before her wanted to set up a certain way, and we needed it set up another way for the cameras. And he was like, no, that's never going to work. But then once she rolled in, she's like, yeah, we'll do whatever. So you kind of have to stick to your guns a little bit, because there are people protecting these artists that, you know, well, that's not how they rehearsed it, and she's going to be mad if that's not exactly how they rehearsed it. But then she rolls in, and it turns out she's totally fine with it. So, so there's other instances where you just have to be able to assert yourself. So when the Free Nationals came back with India Shawn to perform their second Tiny Desk, the vocal on Anderson's mic was sort of, he was in a position and the shotgun mic was on a boom arm. And I think when he sat down, the boom arm kind of went kind of far away. And I got sort of a lot more drums and less of his vocal, because he plays pretty loud. And I don't have the mic right up on it. It's like kind of way out here. So after the performance, which was incredible, I jumped up on the desk and like applauded like this. Like, oh, that was so great, you guys, in front of the whole audience in the middle of the performance, which obviously means I'm stopping everything down. I jumped up. I said, that was so awesome. I just wanted to get that mic in a little bit of a better position. There's a, you know, I want to make sure I get your vocals loud and clear. Would you mind doing it one more time? The audience was psyched, because they're like, yeah, we want to see that again. Because it's like one shot, and it's, you know, Anderson .Paak has our most successful Tiny Desk with like 66 million views, and they came back, and of course the audience was psyched, and he had just like one song he was playing. But I wanted to make sure that, you know, if I need to stop and get something again, I'm going to do it. And that's a really tough position to be in as a technical director, audio producer, audio engineer, to be like, especially in a live situation like that. You don't want to be the guy or the gal who's like, oh man, I'm so sorry, I messed up.
Sorry.
Right. Or like, I didn't hit record, but the fact of the matter is if you don't interrupt, if you don't say something, you don't get it. And there's no chance. So I think the hardest part of the job is to know what you have, what you're getting, paying attention to 10,000 things simultaneously, and recognizing, oh shit, that line is cutting in and out. Oh, where's that crackling coming from? And figuring out if you can get away with it and not have to stop down. Like there was an instance where one of my audience mics wasn't recording, and then one other like spot mic on a instrument wasn't recording. And it was my fault. I think the recorders I use, it's like very easy to hit a button that de-arms the track, and then it blinks blue, and it's a tiny, tiny little light, and there's a million things going on, and I didn't see it. So I knew after the recording was finished that it didn't work. I said, oh shit, why aren't those looking like they're looking? This is a disaster. And then I had to calculate whether or not I had enough to get away with it. So I had one audience mic, so I'm just going to put a stereoizer on that. Yeah. And just exactly. And turn it into stereo. So that took care of that. And then the other spot mic, I had another mic that was sort of close by that I'll just have to EQ and tweak and really try to emphasize it. And it won't be as good as the multi-track mic that I missed. Or I have my 2-track backup, and it's the 2-track recorded everything fine. So there have been instances where I like cut to the 2-track version in the middle of the song just to get that one section where I didn't have that mic armed, and then cut back. So in other words, we're all human. We're all going to make mistakes. You have to figure out when you can get away with it and sort of, okay, I have what I need to move forward. And frankly, when, you know, I knew that Anderson was off mic, I could have made it sound probably fine, but I knew I could have made it sound better. And I felt like this was too big to mess up. I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop the whole concert, jump on the desk. Woo, that was awesome, you guys. And then say, but can we do it again? And they just kind of laughed it off. And I think that was because the way I handled it. I didn't go like, oh, excuse me, sorry, stop the show.
Yeah,
Like,
could we
no, I
just,
did
yeah.
it in such a way that my personality came through, and that's how I always try to conduct myself, is to do everything with a sense of ease, laughter, personality. And don't get me wrong, I get stressed out. I've snapped at people and musicians. Yeah. I've made musicians cry. It's, you know, it's a tough line. Yeah. And it's just, you gotta, there's nothing that can get you through it except experience, and just to keep at it and figuring out what works and what doesn't, and learning from your mistakes.
Oh, powerful. I think the best follow-up question from social media is the most difficult Tiny Desk audio-wise. Which one is the most difficult one?
The first that comes to mind is Leanne La Havas. Doesn't look particularly complicated. You've got a piano player, you've got a background vocalist, you've got Leanne singing vocals, playing guitar on one song, and I think just singing on the others. But her vocal was so dynamic. It was really tricky to figure out when to go to plus 20, on the volume automation, and when to go back down to 0, figuring out exactly where to ramp those volumes up and down so that everything sounded smooth and not too seesaw-y or nauseating, especially on the song Forget, the last track of Leanne La Havas's Tiny Desk. In the office, she did a home concert as well that I helped coordinate, because I just thought she's just so perfect, so intimate, so wonderful. But her volume fluctuated so much, and I've got the shotgun mic, pretty far back, so that I need to set, and it does clip. If you listen carefully, it definitely clips in the beginning of the first song, and I had to make a little bit of adjustments. She got louder after soundcheck, as everyone does. There's also little moments where like something dropped off like a windowsill, and it goes clunk, and I like dip out of the recording, and I muted it pretty heavily, but you see her put on a huge smile because she's laughing at something that fell in the background, and people mention in the comments, oh, it's so cute, she's smiling during that moment, but really I'm like dipping out this huge distraction. So I think that one comes to mind. Even though it looks really simple, the simplest Tiny Desk can be super challenging, and just figuring out again when to bring the volume automation up and down, and how to EQ it, and how to ride the reverb so that it's not too wet, but it's not too dry, and just figuring out that balance of making it sound supernatural, yet supernatural. Like, you want it to sound better than it is, but you also want to be truthful to it. And I think what we're seeing with the home concerts is that a lot of these artists who are so incredible. I'm watching like Dua Lipa in the background here. I love her home concert. It's got 22 million views. It's insane, but it's not, I can't wait to get her at the real Tiny Desk, because it's going to be so much better. It's just in the sense that it's just going to be more natural. And I feel like I love her home concert, but it seems as if it's a music video that you would just see on, and it's recorded as such with all the backing tracks. There's like a drum machine in it, and it just doesn't quite come off as natural sounding, because there's lots of effects on the vocals, and it's, mixed and compressed to within an inch of its life, where a real Tiny Desk I'll let be a bit more dynamic and natural sounding, and I'll let some of the little, like, it's kind of like the equivalent of airbrushing in a magazine. Yeah, it's beautifully airbrushed, and it's done in a really nice way, where I'll do much less airbrushing and make sure that the sort of like humanity of it still exists.
Our very own Black Coffee did a Tiny Desk. Yeah, it was shot in Johannesburg, actually. That's the city I'm in right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me look it up.
Look at that?
I'm sure I did. I want to remind myself before I speak to it. I'm sure once I see it, I'll be like, oh yeah. Right. And what's wonderful about the home series is that artists have been able to do them, even though they might not necessarily come to Washington, D.C. Yeah. And that's been wonderful. Like, if Black Coffee is based in South Africa, it's been pretty astounding that we're able to get them to be a part of our series. And what I do appreciate about all of these home concerts is that they're doing it in the spirit of Tiny Desk. They're trying to make the call of it, stripping it down and making it really straightforward. Oh yeah, I see it now. That was really cool. Wow. Yeah.
South Africa. Now, I
Amazing.
think in closing, I have one more question. How has the gear progressed over the years, or not, like your equipment wise?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I mean, I used to do everything on analog gear with external processing, even when the computer existed at NPR, certainly in terms of doing all of our sort of like news stories and stuff. Everything got patched in real time through processing chains. You play back audio on reel-to-reel analog tape and then make quick changes to your EQ before it got to the next clip. And you're just kind of like running around doing things in real time. And there's a beauty to that. I'm riding faders like this, not even looking at my meters, but looking over at my tape machines for when the leader tape comes, which is the white part between the sound, and like, oh, the leader tape's coming, so I need to hit stop. I'd have remote controls on the machines, and I'd be able to stop stuff, and I would write notes on the leader tape. Okay, the next clip is going to be -3 dB on my fader, and I would just set everything up. And there was some beauty to sort of that linear real-time mixing where you're taking notes and you kind of have to do a lot of preparation and then you go, versus now when it's all on the computer and it's so much easier because it all can happen non-linearly. It doesn't have to happen in real time anymore. So in that sense, it's wonderful that it takes much less time if I'm trying to figure out in Leanne LaHavis's Forget song when to bring up her mic and when to bring down her mic because she's so dynamic. I no longer have to like memorize the song in my mind and like bring the fader up and down. I can see it on the waveform and figure out exactly, sort of you learn by looking at the waveform when stuff makes sense and how a certain shape will sound based on experience. So that sense, the technology has progressed a lot. It's obviously much less expensive. You can have everything on your laptop and all these plugins, and much cheaper than buying all of this outboard gear. And much less expensive to maintain. You don't have to maintain the pots of a console if it's all on the computer. You don't have to maintain a noisy, like there'd be some gear in the studio. It's just like you would turn an old Yuri filter, notch filter, and it'd be like every time you turn the dial because it was dirty and it had to be cleaned. And I don't know. I didn't mind that so much. It's almost like you had to be more attentive to it, and you had to pay closer attention to when things weren't calibrated. Like there's little calibration tools, and you had to like put tone through everything and make sure that what 0 going in is 0 coming out. Where now it's
software for
it's all kind of handled for you.
Yeah. I think I've picked your brain. I think we've learned so much from the session. I just want to thank you one more time for actually.
It was my pleasure.
This is a huge milestone for the channel. Thank you so much. Also, another what's this guy's name? Raffaello. Under the comment section, he said I should just say thank you for the amazing mixes. So
okay. It has been an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Oh my gosh, I'm so lucky. Really. And we can all do it, really, truly. It's just a matter of being at the right place, the right time, and having the right attitude, and just using your ears, right? Just listening.
Definitely.
And knowing how to sort of change things when things sound, knowing, just having that instinctual ability to, be a musician, really. That's what us audio engineers are. We're also absolutely musicians.
In our own right.
Absolutely, without question.
Thank you so much, Josh. Really appreciate the session.
Pleasure.